Good afternoon, attendees. I see people trickling in. Give a few more seconds before we, or give a minute or so before we go and get started. All right, I guess we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Carey. I am a project lead on the professional services team, and I've been with Decisions for a little over 2.5 years at this point. And today's my first lunch and learn, so I look forward to answering some questions and being able to assist you guys in whatever capacity that might be. So before we get started, I do want to let you guys know about the Decisions Days is upcoming. Here's the date listed, October 4th to the 6th. It's an opportunity to come out and meet myself and my peers, the team that you've been working with, get a little bit more insight into Decisions, the platform. And we have such topics such as filling the automation pipeline, intelligent service orchestration, decisions in AI, which is a really interesting one. I'm looking forward to that one personally. The lessons learned for building industry applications within Decisions, and then the other two listed. So lots of great opportunities, as well as getting insight into the product roadmap. And if you do have the opportunity to, I highly encourage you guys to come out and meet us and join us for Decisions Days. Without any further delay, I guess we can go ahead and get started on the question. So I did get a question early from John Balta. And so I tried to validate a form field using a flow. I want the form to get stuck if the form field does not pass validation. I thought that is simple because you already done the task many times using rules and it's not working as expected. Therefore, you looked over the documentation. Great call out. It's always the first source to go to. And on this example, you cannot achieve the display message. Checkbox must be selected on the form when the button is unchecked. See the video. Okay, so unfortunately, I was unable to see the video, but I do know what you're talking about. So I was thinking that we could just take a minute or a few minutes here to build out an example and walk through the problem that you encountered and hopefully get your resolution about that.
So just a moment. When I say
Sure.
see the video, I was referring to the video from documentation. So at the end, when you do the debug, if you look in the documentation, I am referring to the decision documentation available. Okay. If you look to debug, when the checkbox is unchecked, yes, you get a message. I cannot get that message. Doesn't matter what I did. So that's my frustration. I don't know what I am doing wrong. However, we will figure out. So that's one question. But that's not the important. The important question is this: it's possible to use the flow to validate a field in such way that if the field does not pass, the form will be stuck in the same way like a rule, you know?
Yes, this is entirely possible. You're on the right path, and
you see the message. You could see the message now. You saw it.
Yes.
Okay. Now I want to tell you something. I did debug. The flow is triggered. I made the debug. I got the information. The former decision issue is giving me exactly the information which I need. For some reason, this information, it's not displayed in the form. I don't know why. So I went through all this process many, many times Unfortunately, something is wrong with me or I don't understand.
No, nothing's wrong with you. I would assume you probably were just missing one small minor step, but that's what the lunch and learns are for. So hopefully we can walk through that together and set that straight for you. How about that?
Sounds
So-
good, and thank you for your help.
You're welcome, sir. 922 lunch and learn. I am going to create a new folder for this is.
If you want, I can share the screen with you and you can see exactly. I build everything. It's there. It's up to you. What is easier?
Sabrina, are we able to allow participants to share their screens?
Unfortunately
so.
not.
Okay.
Not on a webinar.
Okay. So since we aren't able to do that, we could just walk through here in this build. So I'm going to add form validation, create a flow, create new. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is drag out a simple show form step. And then I'm going to create the form. And I'm going to add a simple text box. And I'm going to just call that name. And the data name is going to be name. Now outcome path, and I'm going to slide a button on here. And close. Awesome. So I'm going to save this. Close this, string this up. And so this ignore. So validation flow. So now I'm just going to walk through the documentation just as you did. So here you have that form, you have the field on here, and so you want to validate this. So I am going to create my validation flow. So I'm not too familiar with version 7, so I'm going to need a little bit of assistance here. Brandon, so when you're configuring your visibility and validation rules and things of that nature, do you do so here? And just like normally there's a toggle where you can, or a radio button where you can just swap over from rules to flow.
Close the active form flows. It's under legacy, I believe. Visibility validation rules. Yep.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Do something on flow. All right. So we selected that. We're going to pass in our variable of name. And all right. And from there, we're going to have a rule. So we want to check if, well, actually, the example, your actual use case, you're using a checkbox, right?
Yes, I'm using a checkbox, but it's fine. If you do the name, it's great. It's
Okay,
I
just want to make sure. Is empty. So if the name is false, if the name is not empty, then we want to allow them to submit the form with no issue. But if it is, then we want to pass with that validation. So here, we want to create a validation. Which is of type form validation issue. Form validation issue. Okay. And that should be it. Save that. So next step on this create data, I want to do a build data. The break level, I'm going to set that to a constant of fatal. Then I'm going to take the message and you must enter a name to close. In the data name, that is going to be constant. This is one gotcha that I've encountered before, that this data name here has to match whatever the name of the data field that you're attempting to validate. So that's something to be sure of as well. And then on my output, I'm going to build an array. Oops. And then as a member of for validation issues, I'm going to also build an array and pass that in my validation. This name empty. Okay. I am of the suspicious type, so I am going to test this flow before I even attempt to test it full scale. So I'm going to debug it. And let's see what happens. So, okay. That's expected. Let's get rid of this name. Let's see what happens. We should get that form validation. Great. So I'm going to close this. And next, I am going to go down here. Inputs missing, validation. Well, I'm not going to bother that rule exception. Not going to bother that. But I do need to update my inputs and map those properly. This is coming from form component. Run on value changed. And let's see, this needs to run on all outcomes. All right, let's give this a spin and see what happens. Well, first I just want. So this has the default message and then it has my custom message. So let me see if I can remove the default message real quick.
I think it's working in your case. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. I was hoping to reproduce some of the magic and be able to troubleshoot that with you, but if we're unable to do that because you can't share your screen, I'd be happy to set up a separate call with you, either myself or someone on support. But I mean, I wouldn't mind personally walking through that with you, so we can. I can send you an email and set up that for you if you like.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I have to do something to figure out by myself. It seems that it's clear. Thank you very much, sir.
No, thank you. But I am curious why that had that separate validation. So let's just take a few more seconds to see. With the visibility rules. Here we go. Validation rules. Brandon, do you have any idea why I had the duplicate error messages?
So we have validation warn, validation error, end server exception message.
Do you think it was because of this?
It could possibly just be using. It couldn't possibly be that.
Oh, because it's probably checked as required. Watch this.
You're right. It's probably just defaults.
Yep, look at that. So optional. Because if you make it required, then it's going to do that by default. So if I was to run this again, I should only get that one error message. Yep, look at that. Does anybody have any other questions regarding validation flows? There's something that a lot of users don't use. They tend to opt out and use the validation rules because in most cases you can use a rule, but in other more specific examples, you may need to use a flow to do some more complex computations. All right, what do I see here? Let me check the chat here.
We have a question from Alex about the plus sign on a property.
Mhm.
And then David Pitcher also has a question about managing a multi-select dropdown. We'll answer Alex's questions because it was up first.
Sure.
Let's see. Can we unmute? Let me see.
Sabrina can.
Sabrina, can
Alex
you?
should be unmuted.
Okay. Alex, you could sort of, I guess, be more specific on where and what property are you referring to here?
I think it appears in the whenever you are in a form, for example,
Okay.
you select. I think that in the form that you were showing before, if you click on it, there was something for a constant. I don't remember where I saw you selected a constant, and then the plus sign appeared. Maybe it was in the flow.
I think so. This is where I declared a constant.
There you
You're
see the
saying here?
message? Yes. And in the data name, you have another one.
Mhm.
What are those pluses for? Because when you click on it, a window opens, at least in mine, yeah, exactly this. I don't know how to use this. So.
This is a good question. I've never seen this or noticed it.
It looks like maybe you can put the constant that you define into a list for future use, but
I think
I'm
that's
not sure.
I think that's another way to like define a constant on
System
that.
constant.
Yeah, I think that's another way to define a constant for that input. Geez, I've seen this before and I can't remember exactly what it is, but I think it's that. Or it's just to define data. I think it's to define like default data for it.
Yeah, but it's talking about lists as if, and you have picks there, and I have no, well, mine are different,
Well,
but I don't know what mine are, obviously.
My assumption here, and let's not assume, but I want to tell you what my initial thoughts were that we're going to test it and see if this is true. So I'm thinking that I can enter a value in here to have it saved to a list that I can predefine as constant, so I don't have to key this in every time. So let's say I'm going to close this, add name, so it's add attach a list. And I think this is the list that other people have selected to add things to. So if I was to select name, or actually, no, this is emails. Either this is going to create, this should create a new list that I could select from. Or actually, that's probably a bad example because it has that one has to be the data name. So let me use this instead. Okay, so it gives you a list of things you can select from as constant. So you can define it as a regular constant, or it gives you that text that you added there.
Hmm.
So if you're using, if you have constant text that's required large scale across an application throughout multiple flows, you can kind of use it to refer to, as opposed to keying it in every time, which is helpful. I guess this is another way to define a pseudo system constant, as far as I can tell. Brandon, is that what you're
Mhm.
getting?
Yeah, that's yeah. I just reached out. Josh is saying it's to add a suggestion list. So that seems to be right. That's what you're generating there. So you're generating like a suggested value list with that plus sign.
Yeah,
I
that's interesting because there is, I'm thinking aloud here, okay? When you have cases, for example, case structure, case data structure, the different states in which a case could be are typically defined as strings. And that is problematic because if you miss a letter in that when you're typing particular state elsewhere, you can, your program will not work, and it's really difficult to debug. But if you can define those states as a list of constants, and when you select them, you do it this way, the probabilities of errors is seriously diminished. I'd have to see whether that's the way it is intended to work, but it is a possibility here. Unfortunately, you define the states not in the same place where you would define as constant in a case, but anyway, so it may not be the perfect use case. But I think I understand what you're doing here. Ultimately, and please correct me if I'm wrong, when you define a constant, it allows you to define, instead of just a string, a list of valid strings. So you attach to that list with a plus sign, and then only those options are presented to you. So you cannot type any. Okay. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. That was a very good question. I learned something new because I had never seen that feature or stumbled across it in my 2.5 years of experience. So learn something new. I believe Brandon said we have another question.
You'll do every day.
Yep. Let me see in the chat. David, a picture. Can you describe my options for managing a multi-select drop-down with a lot of data in the source list? I've seen the documentation on using a rule with a contain on a fetch entity step, but I'm using steps other than a fetch entity to grab the list, which do not contain a option on a specific field. Let's see. We can probably just use this a rule collection filter step for that, to just sort of filter that out. So Brandon, can you unmute David so he can speak more to his use case here, if he hasn't been already?
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, so our developers have done, I think you would call it a custom step, I guess, that hits a service and returns a bunch of data like that. That part is what it is, right? But I'm basically getting back a list of maybe, I don't know, 2,000 objects when I call that, right? And I need the user to be able to pick maybe, I don't know, four or five of them at a time, right? So, you know, I built it, I hooked up my form and everything, and, you know, I sent it to the tester for this, and they're saying that the drop down is taking forever to load. And I was like, well, it's probably because there's a bunch of data there. So
Right.
that the step that I need to use to be able to grab that from our external database, it doesn't have the same criteria definition, or like I can't put a contain option on it to manage it when I'm fetching that data, right? Like the way that it is in the documentation. So I'm wondering if there's a way either in a flow or in the control itself for me to basically be able to manage that, to basically, if they actuate the drop down, display the first 10 of them, but still have the other ones in the list, to where when they start typing something, it'll come up, if that makes any sense.
So allow me to speak to that point. I think what your issue is here, you're saying that the main point of contention from the user is the fact that there's so much data that it's slow when they try to use the dropdown, right?
Yeah, they're saying the drop down takes
Okay.
forever to load.
So had you considered doing any kind of caching?
I did not. So I guess if you can elaborate on that,
Sure, I'd love
may
to.
help.
So I think what I'm proposing here is that you could potentially have like a scheduled job configured that would run once daily in the morning, and it would make that call to that database through the external connection, the API, whatever you have configured to get that data, the external database connection, pull that data in and cache it for 24 hours. And then you can use that in lieu of fetching it every time that flow is running. So you don't have the performance hit.
I see. Okay.
So I can build out an example. Of course, I won't have that call, but I can show you how to set up the caching behavior, and
Yeah.
we can walk through configuring a scheduled job if you like as well.
Yeah, I mean, we know how to do scheduled jobs and stuff. So I guess the caching
Okay.
behavior would be the most beneficial.
All right. We're going to create a new one. Get data from this first one, show editor. Let's say, well, we're not taking in anything. We don't care about this. What we do care about here is this. So let's say I have data, and it's a list of strings. So this is essentially what the flow is going to be. So inside of your flow that you're going to put for your scheduled job, I'm just going to put a dummy call here.
Sure.
All right. So this awesome. So now we have our list here. And so this flow that we just made, that's the flow that you're going to put on your scheduled job. So you're just going to plug that in as well,
Right.
and just have this reproduced. So I am going to get rid of this first. This bothers me, but okay, cool. So now we're going to go to outcomes and cache outcomes here. And you can do global, and we can specify how long we want to retain the data for. And let's just say we're retaining 24 hours. Well, it's going to default us to 23 hours and 5 minutes. But that's all you have to do. So what you would do there is you would set up this call, because what it sounds like, you have this, you're making a call inside of your flow, and then you're populating it, and then you're passing that into that dropdown as an input.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So this is how you would do it. You would cache this flow and then run this on a scheduled job. So in the morning time, it would run this flow, grab the data, and then whenever you did it within that 24-hour period or that specified time span, because you may want to do this twice a day. So it's all variable. You have control over that, as you saw here with the cache time span. But it'll bypass that and allow you to not see the performance hit. And I think there's there's a few other ways we could look at some optimization, but I would try that first as my primary way of troubleshooting that.
So I need to set my scheduled job for the same time span as what my cache time span is, right? Because
Yes.
I need to schedule that job to basically call that flow to run it to recache my data. But if my
Correct.
cache time span is less than that, it's going to dump. And then basically that flow would run as normal because it wouldn't have a cache to go look at, right?
I have not I haven't actually ran into that problem because I've always configured to run pretty much in accordance with each other.
I
But
gotcha.
I think that would happen. I think it would just run again. And so you would see the performance hit.
I see. Okay.
But
And so then if you're caching it, it knows like, oh, I hit this flow. Let me go look in my cache first. And if I don't see anything, then let me execute as normal.
right, but I think it'll only do that once. So let's say you have your time span for 12 hours and you ran that scheduled job for 12 hours. Okay, then the next time you run it after that 12-hour span, and like even if it's just inside the flow, not with the scheduled job, this will behave as if it's the first run, but after that first one, then you'll get the cache behavior again. So it'll refresh your cache after you run it the first time. That's what
see.
I'm
Okay.
guessing.
I guess
Brandon,
next
does that sound right?
question.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part? I was looking at a ticket.
No worries. So when I should have given you a heads up. So if you were to have this set, let's say for 12 hours, but the scheduled job ran for 24 hours, the first time the scheduled job runs, it'll grab the data, it'll pass the data to the form, and you won't have the issue with the performance hit. However, after the caching cycle has elapsed, because we have it set here for 23, just imagine this is 12, then the cache is effectively empty. So the next time you would run, this flow would actually run live at runtime. And then after that, subsequent executions for the next 12 hours would then contain that cache data.
I believe so. Yes, that sounds about right.
Okay.
Okay. I guess kind of follow-up question about that.
Sure.
Where and how is it storing that cache? Is that just putting that in memory somewhere, or like if somebody has a not good machine or a server that they're running this on, I mean, if it's a ton of data, are they going to start running into memory issues from caching it? Or I guess I'm just curious where and how that cache is happening.
I believe it is cached in memory. I don't know if it'd cause memory issues on the machine itself from doing caching. I guess it depends on how much we're caching here. But if we're clearing, I believe it should get cleared after 12 hours. So I don't think it'd be too big of a hit like Brian is saying.
I see. Okay. I mean, I can't control when the user accesses this, so I would basically need to like store it in a cache indefinitely, right? And just refresh the cache in case they change something in the external database, basically to pull that update, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I see.
But I would say the biggest safeguard against that would just be have the job run in accordance with this caching cycle, the time span you specify.
Okay, I got you.
Good questions.
Okay.
Good questions.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch.
Do we have any other additional questions?
Yeah, Alex has a question. Is there a problem with the time taken by the DB to return a few thousand records, or the time taken by the browser trying to allocate memory to accommodate the large array of records? I guess you're more asking what's taking the most time here, or is the time due to the 1,000 records or due to the browser trying to allocate memory? Is that correct, Alex?
Correct. Yeah. Before jumping to caching, maybe worth determining where the time is spent, right? Caching has, a lot of problems, and I've seen many. When your underlying data changes, if it changes very often, you have to refresh the cache as often. Otherwise, the users will not see the latest data set.
Right.
But fundamentally, I think that maybe, I think it was David, the one who was asking the question. Sorry, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Maybe worth checking whether the user experience of presenting several thousand records to a user at once is a good thing, right? Maybe I like what you said about, reducing the set, and sometimes, letting them type a couple of the first 2-3 letters, and with those you go to the database and fetch records. Might be a better UI, but I don't know. It's your decision in the end, right?
Yeah. What can I put? Yeah, I like that idea. Just out of curiosity. So if I have that drop down in a form, what if I just don't make it as a form input? I just run a data flow that takes, because then I can control it, right? Like I
Well,
can
it's still going to make that call at runtime.
Right, but you can still.
yeah, but I can control what comes back based on what they're typing, right? Like I can, in that thing, then I would be able to say, okay.
Yeah, because the speed issue might not be an issue with the amount of data that's being pulled in, but just the amount of time it takes to render all that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because my call comes back in like under a second with all that stuff. And
so Brian, this might be a better case for the rule collection filter step.
Yeah.
And just
Are you familiar with that?
Have that as an input onto that, and then just pass that through with the data flow.
Are you familiar with rule collection filters, or would you like for us to step through an example of that for you?
If you could step through an example, if everybody else doesn't mind going through that. I mean, I've done it once or twice, but
Okay. The rule collection filter is one of my favorite steps just because of how powerful it is. And you have the ability to configure whether you want it to be an inclusive filter. It's inclusive by default, so anything that meets the criteria. An exclusive filter, or if you want to return both non-matches and matches in 2 separate sets. And I'll show you guys what I'm talking about in a second. So I need a multi-select. Drop down. Something else that gets people when they use multi-select drop-downs on a form is they often don't put enough space. So when they make a selection, it doesn't look like anything's been selected on the form. So you want to make sure you have ample space on the underside of your multi-select drop-down. And this is going to be a drop-down of, let's say, just strings. This is going to be on a flow. So Brandon, what you were saying is have this be sourced by a data flow that takes in the value that's keyed in and runs it and returns that data, almost like a live runtime parameterized query.
Right, essentially.
So,
That's what they that's what we recommend, but because the stuff we're referring to or the steps David's using don't have like the contains in it. That's why we need to sort of build it like that. But yeah, basically like a live running parameterized query, and just not even a query, just sort of fetch like a live filter, I guess would be a better way to say it.
okay. So names, and then I need to configure the data flow that runs on that. I'm just going to pick the other one that I already made. Plug that in. Update inputs. And then so inside of here, this is where we would have your call. So this would be the same thing. However, using this method, we would have a rule collection filter step. Like I said, this is one of my favorite steps, and I want to show you the properties and have a small conversation about why exactly this is a really helpful step. So one thing that this is good for is anytime you have a set of data that you're looking to iterate through and you have a rule, so you have a list of something you need to check whether one of the fields on these objects is true, whether or not they contain some kind of a string sequence. Anytime there's iteration in a rule, this is a good use case or a good opportunity to use a rule collection filter to optimize your flow. And so you'll take in whatever group of objects. So for this one, I am going to use the create data just to initialize something. And initialize names. It's a string list. Save this. So now I have access to that. And maybe I should have called it data to match. Okay. So now I have my data. And so now you can map the data to that rule collection filter. And so let's check this out first. When I said the rule collection filter, you can make it return matches, which it does by default. So anything that meets the rule criteria and passes out a true value will be passed out in the list. The false values will be excluded. But if you want to do the reverse, you could use a return non-matches. And if you want both in two separate lists, like if I click this, non-matches and matches, they'll be output as their own separate list. So this is a really useful step when it comes to processing, handling data, and making your flows more performant. Is the rule collection filter step like a where clause? Sort of, I would say, because you're checking where a certain condition is true, but it returns I say where the difference lies is that you can, if you were to pass out true and false, it's a little bit different. It gives you a larger data set, more flexibility on the return, but I would say this is very similar to a where clause, correct? So if I go into the rule collection filter itself, so you have access to all the data in the flow, but you don't want to select data, you want to select entity. Entity is how decisions refers to an individual object of the input type inside of the rule collection filter. So whether this is a list of accounts, a list of insurance policies, whatever kind of composite objects you have, or a simple type, you always want to select entity. So if entity, let's just say, starts with BR. So let's check that out. Done. Close. So I'm just gonna run this really quickly just to show you. Say we have the list of names that were initialized, Brian, Brandon, Sabrina. And the rule collection filter, it passed out. Since I have it configured for matches and non-matches, Brian and Brandon, we both meet the BR condition. Sabrina does not. So therefore, I would expect the list, because I have it as a constant. So if I select from flow, that'll be updated. Great. Okay. So I would use the rule collection filter. So you're making your external database call. You are going to filter it out, and then you're going to pass out the returned list. So then we'll close this. And update the inputs. It's gonna output that. And you can have it trigger on the multi-select dropdown when they stop typing. And then that will refresh this and give you new options. Am I missing anything, Brandon? Or is this exactly what you were describing?
Yeah, similarly, if you go back to the data flow real quick.
Sure.
It was yeah, if you edit it real quick. The input didn't update. So you'll need to sort of update the input so it listens to what we're typing on it. Yeah, so you'll need to actually add the input here. So it actually has data to sort of pass through.
Or
And Alex is asking, can that be renamed? Are you talking about the input or the actual output to the flow? Entity.
entity? No, that's can't change that
Okay.
inside of the rule collection filter.
Ah, yes. Yep. And so that's how we do. We just have it listen to that, and then it would run. And once you type in, it should then run every time that anytime it's done filter, or anytime you're done typing, it should run a filter against that, and it should run and filter against that. Does that help you, David?
Oh yeah, sorry, I was putting it in the chat. So if they delete what they typed and then retype something else, it just runs again, right? It's not like a one-time fire and forget thing.
Right. It runs every
Gotcha,
time.
gotcha.
So anytime you try to make any sort of changes, it'll run again.
Okay, and then just to confirm on the entity thing, that's sorry, that's literally just a container for whatever type of object I'm passing into it. So once I pass in some sort of complex type, I would have access to those properties.
Yep.
Okay,
Entity refers to one instance of that object.
got it. Okay, thanks so much for that. I think I'm going to go back and try this approach.
All right. Did anyone else have any questions? We have 10 minutes, so we have about 10 minutes to ask questions or answer questions.
This lunch and learn flew by.
Yeah, these fly by when you get good questions like these.
Okay, I'll ask a question.
Hey, Mr. Potter.
How are you doing?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
Good, thanks. So, I've been like zooming around to one of my flows like a drunken Canadian. And, one of the things that I'm noticing is occasionally when I save it, I get this warning message saying that I've got a boolean that is mismatched with a boolean that can be null. And I'm just kind of wondering what is, what is driving that behavior, and is it just like a warning, or is it just like be aware of unexpected results kind of thing?
I would need to reproduce that. That sounds like a very specific occurrence.
Okay.
Is that something that I can build a simple example for in the next few minutes? And
No, like I'm trying to reproduce it and I can't. That's why I say I'm running around my flow because I'm making so many changes so quickly that I'm not really tracking what change is responsible for what. But I do notice that every now and again I get this warning message saying that I've got this data type mismatch, and that that sometimes like for example in the return on a flow, the data type, like flow output, it says boolean can be null. And like I'll go into that the flow and see if I can actually change the actual data type that's coming out. And like I look at the data type and it's got boolean. And if I select that field, usually there's like a little pop-up that shows me that it can be null. And sometimes I'll try and get rid of that can be null thing and it won't let me. So I'm just kind of wondering, maybe, if you had any kind of info on that, but maybe it's just I should close all my browsers and begin again.
At the moment, I don't have any information on that, but since you're already a direct customer of mine on the professional services side, during our weekly calls, I'll be happy to set aside some time with you and see if we can get to the heart of that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I would love to do that now, but with this being a webinar, we don't have the
Yep. No worries.
option you share your screen.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right, well, I'll give you guys a few minutes to ponder, and if anything comes up, and feel free to just raise your hand in the chat or however you choose to communicate, drop it in the Q&A section, and if we have time for it, we can get it addressed.
I have a lazy person's question.
Go ahead.
Well, I have a memory that in the report to designer, when you can't join multiple tables, like that there's a limit, and that, I mean, at some point I think I actually wrote some kind of like weird field thing, which basically goes out because I couldn't join to multiple entities kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Does that ring a bell?
Yes, I believe so. Are you referring to like the join tables?
Yeah.
A table join?
Yeah.
And yeah, the table join, you can only join two in decisions if you're using that method.
Okay, so I've heard on these lunch and learns, and again, I haven't really kind of understood the actual mechanism of how this works, but that I can actually build like my own personal join and kind of refer to that as a single entity.
Yeah.
So can you walk through the in 3 minutes the how that works?
How you would have your own custom join?
Yeah.
You would, okay. I hope that I'm understanding you correctly up until the last part. Let's see if we can do a speed run. This is simply the step. Actually, I don't even think I need to build anything. I can just show you the step. Have you ever heard of a raw SQL step?
I've heard mention of it, but I've never actually seen it in real life.
Here we go. So the raw SQL step allows you to build whatever SQL that you would need to be executed. So you can include your joins in here, and it doesn't have the limitations of the table join. Alternately, instead of using this step, you could also, under the same menu where you create the data types, you can create your own custom query. So I'll show you that as well.
So in like the integrations tab, I can go in and I can actually, you know, against the local database or whatnot,
Yep.
add a query. And so I get to choose local connection, and then basically I can do anything that I can do in SSMS.
Correct.
And then I can, okay, and then I can persist this and then refer to it from within the report tool.
Yeah, you can actually use a SQL step as a report data source. So you can
Okay.
just have that SQL. You don't have to put it in a flow or anything like that. You could just select it as a data source. I'd be happy to show you that.
Okay.
So we have 1 minute here and 30 seconds. All right, speed run.
Okay, 90 seconds. Okay, go.
I'm just gonna, for sake of time, create a report. And the data source. And I believe the SQL, yeah, database integrations. And if you have it configured, it should appear under here, if I recall
Okay.
correctly, or either it's one of these two. It should appear under these options once you have the query configured as a database integration.
Okay, cool.
Right on time.
Yep.
All right. Thanks everyone for your wonderful questions. It was a pleasure doing my first lunch and learn, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks, cheers.
Thanks, Brian.
Bye guys.